I wish you a happy begging life, you old fool. My daughter-in-law sneered, flicking a glob of wet cemetery mud onto my son's mahogany casket like she was disposing of trash. She stood there in her brand-new stilettos, checking her watch, thinking she had just inherited a logistics empire and a multi-million-dollar cliffside villa. She thought I was just a grieving, washed-up 72-year-old man she could discard along with her widow's weeds. She forgot that before I was a grieving father, I was the structural engineer who built this city's skyline, and I knew exactly how to find the one stress fracture that would bring her whole world crashing down. If you're listening to this, hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know I have witnesses for the demolition I'm about to trigger. She thought she held the keys to the kingdom, but she didn't realize I still owned the foundation. Let me take you back to the moment the rain started falling, and the first crack appeared in the concrete. The rain didn't wash the world clean. It wasn't the romantic cleansing deluge the poets write about. It was a cold, industrial gray sheet that turned the cemetery dirt into a slick black paste, a slurry that coated my shoes and seemed to want to drag me down into the earth with him. I stood there, a 72-year-old man encased in a wool coat that had absorbed enough water to weigh 1,000 pounds. It pressed against my shoulders, a physical manifestation of the burden sitting on my chest. The water soaked through the layers, chilling my skin, but the shivering wasn't a reaction to the temperature. It was the physics of the moment. It was the sight of that mahogany box. They were lowering my son James into the ground. I am a man who deals in facts. In concrete, steel, rebar, and calculated loads. For 40 years I ran sterling infrastructure. I didn't just build buildings. I engineered the skeletons of cities. I built suspension bridges that spanned roaring rivers, calculating the oscillation of the wind against the cables. I built skyscrapers that scraped the belly of the clouds, ensuring the foundations could withstand the tectonic shifts of the earth. I knew everything there was to know about structural integrity. I knew that every material has a breaking point. I knew about shear force, the unaligned forces pushing one part of a body in one specific direction, and another part of the body in the opposite direction. Looking at that casket, I felt the main support beam of my life snap. The shear force was too great. It wasn't supposed to end like this. The structural logic of life dictates that the foundation remains while the upper floors are renovated. Parents are the foundation. Children are the skyscrapers. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. James was 45. A heart attack. The coroner had said. Stress, the doctors told me in the sterile hallway of the hospital. Their voices hushed and practiced. His heart just gave out. The cortisol levels. The hypertension. It was a catastrophic system failure. I clenched my jaw until the muscles in my face ached, grinding my molars together. I knew better. Stress doesn't just appear out of thin air like weather. Stress is manufactured. It is an output. It is built, brick by brick, by the environment and the people around you. It creates tension in the beams until the steel screams and the rivets pop. I shifted my gaze past the open grave, away from the box that held my boy, and looked at the architect of his stress. Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She stood 10 feet away, a vision of curated mourning. She was a study in aesthetic grief. Her black dress was silk, inappropriate for the weather, clinging to her frame in the rain. It was tailored to show off her waist, to accentuate the curve of her hips, not to hide the devastation of a widow. She wore oversized sunglasses, the frames thick and black, shielding her eyes. Not from the sun, the sky was a bruised purple-gray without a hint of light, but from me. She was hiding the windows to a house I suspected was empty of anything human. She held a lace handkerchief in a gloved hand, dabbing at cheeks that I knew with mathematical certainty were dry. She stood under a large black umbrella, held by a chauffeur, dry and protected, while the rest of us soaked in the misery. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through the soft patter of the rain on the grass. Tap, tap. I looked down. Her foot, clad in a towering stiletto heel, was tapping against the wet strip of artificial grass the funeral home had laid down to keep our shoes clean. Tap, tap. It was a rhythmic, sharp, percussive sound. It wasn't the jittery, erratic tapping of sorrow or anxiety. It was the steady, driving rhythm of impatience. It was a metronome counting down the seconds until she could be somewhere else. She wasn't mourning a husband. She was waiting for a transaction to clear. My stomach twisted, a cold knot tightening around my gut. She was checking the time on her wrist. A discreet glance, then another tap, while my son was being lowered into the dark. "William," a soft voice said beside me. It was Marcus, my oldest friend, my personal attorney, the man who had drafted the contracts for half the skyline of this city. He looked as weary as I felt, his gray hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his eyes red-rimmed. "The service is ending," Marcus whispered, his breath visible in the lead air. "Do you want to place the first rose?" I nodded. My throat felt too tight for words, as if filled with quick-drying cement. I stepped forward. My legs felt heavy, resistant, like I was walking through wet concrete that was already setting. I reached into the basket the funeral director held out, and took a single white rose. The thorns had been stripped away, a sanitized version of nature, just like this sanitized version of goodbye. I looked down into the hole. It was deep, too deep. "Rest, Jamie," I whispered. My voice cracked, a fissure running through the granite of my composure. "The noise is over now. No more stress, just quiet." I dropped the flower. It fluttered down, spinning once, before landing softly on the polished wood. The contrast of the white petals against the dark mahogany was violent. I stepped back, wiping a raindrop or a tear from my cheek with a trembling hand. Then Chloe moved. She didn't step forward with the grace of a grieving wife. She marched. There was energy in her step, a coiled spring releasing. She didn't reach for the basket of roses. Instead, she reached down, her gloved fingers clawing into the pile of wet excavation dirt. She grabbed a handful of the black sludge. She tossed it onto the casket with a flick of her wrist. Thwack. The sound of the wet mud hitting the wood was dull and disrespectful. It looked dismissive. It looked like she was dusting off her hands after a messy, inconvenient job, like she was taking out the trash. She turned around immediately. She didn't linger. She didn't look at the grave. She looked at me. She lowered her sunglasses just an inch, peering over the rim. I saw her eyes then. They were hard, flat, cold. There was a glitter in them that made my stomach turn. Not the glitter of tears, but the shine of avarice. It was the look of a demolition expert watching a building fall, calculating the scrap value of the copper wiring. She walked over to me, her heels sinking slightly into the turf. "We need to meet," she said. Her voice wasn't hushed. It wasn't the whisper of a widow at a funeral. It was sharp, businesslike, high-pitched, and demanding. "Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. At the villa," she commanded. "There are administrative matters regarding the estate that can't wait." I stared at her, the rain dripping from the brim of my hat. "Can't wait?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous. I pointed a shaking finger at the open grave behind us. "The workers haven't even started shoveling the dirt back in." "James isn't even cold," I added, the horror of her timing washing over me. She adjusted her gloves, pulling the leather tight over her knuckles. "Life is for the living, William," she said, reciting the platitude with zero conviction, using it as a shield for her ambition. She snapped her sunglasses back into place, hiding her eyes once more. "And I plan on living very well. Don't be late." The audacity hit me like a physical slap, stinging my face. She turned on her heel, pivoting away from me. She didn't walk toward James's sensible sedan, the car he had driven for 6 years because it was reliable. She walked toward a car I had never seen before, parked on the access road, gleaming like a black diamond against the gray backdrop, was a brand-new Mercedes G-Wagon. It was huge, aggressive, obsidian black, with tinted windows. It looked like a tank, designed for urban warfare. It screamed money. It screamed excess. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, opened the door. She shit inside without looking back, disappearing into the plush leather interior. The engine roared to life with a deep, guttural growl, a V8 exhaust note that cut through the respectful silence of the cemetery like a chainsaw. I watched the red taillights disappear into the mist. A cold knot formed in my stomach, distinct from the grief. I had spent my life calculating loads and stresses to prevent collapses. I spent 40 years looking for hairline fractures in concrete, for rust in steel, for soil erosion that could undermine a foundation. But as I watched that car vanish, realizing she had likely bought it while my son was in the ICU, I realized something terrifying. I had missed a critical structural failure in my own family. I had let a corrosive element into the foundation. And now, looking at the fresh earth and the retreating luxury car, I knew the whole building was coming down. The next morning, the sky hadn't bothered to change. It remained a flat, oppressive sheet of slate gray, hanging low over the coast like a suspended ceiling threatening to collapse. I drove the winding coastal road to the villa. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel of my vintage Jaguar, the knuckles white, the arthritis in my fingers aching in time with the damp weather. The villa was a property I had purchased for James and Chloe 5 years ago. It was a wedding gift, a sprawling Mediterranean-style estate perched on the limestone cliffs, overlooking the churning Atlantic. When I signed the deed, I had imagined the rooms filled with the specific chaotic noise of a growing family. I had engineered the dream in my head. Sunday dinners on the terrace, the sound of grandchildren running across the marble floors, the safety of a legacy secured in stone and stucco. I had bought it for laughter. As I pulled up to the driveway, however, the house didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortification. The massive wrought iron gates, usually left open during the day, were shut tight. The black metal bars rose 12 feet into the air, topped with gilded spikes that looked less like decoration and more like a warning. I rolled down my window. The sea air was cold and salty. I leaned out and punched my code into the keypad mounted on the stone pillar. It was a code I had used 1,000 times. 198 INOR. James's birth year. Beep, beep, beep. A harsh, dissonant buzz followed. The small LCD screen flashed red. Access denied. I frowned, the skin between my eyebrows furrowing. I tried again, pressing the buttons with deliberate, angry force. Once dear. Access denied. A flush of irritation, hot and prickly, crept up my neck. It wasn't just a malfunction. In my line of work, systems don't just fail, they are tampered with. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly. Not from age, but from a rising, incoherent rage. I called the house line. It rang and rang, echoing into a void. I called Chloe's cell, straight to voicemail. Finally, I was forced to do something I hadn't done since before I bought the place. I pressed the buzzer on the intercom, waiting like a solicitor, like a stranger, at the gate of my own generosity. I waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant crashing of waves against the cliffside. 1 minute. 2. She was making me wait. It was a power play, as subtle and structural as a retaining wall. Yes? Chloe's voice crackled through the speaker. It was tinny, distorted by the static, but the tone was unmistakable. It was breezy, light, unburdened. "It's William," I said, my voice gravelly. "The code isn't working." "Oh, William," she said, feigning surprise. "I had it changed." "Changed?" I asked, staring at the red light on the keypad. "Why?" "Security concerns," she replied smoothly. "A widow alone in a big house. You understand, don't you? I can't be too careful." Lies. The word hung in the air between us, invisible but heavy. She wasn't afraid of intruders. She was marking her territory. She was pouring new concrete over old boundaries. "The gate is opening now," she said. With a groan of heavy machinery, the iron gates swung inward. I put the car in gear and drove up the long, winding driveway lined with cypress trees. The disrespect was a small thing, perhaps, to an outsider. But in my world, small cracks are the heralds of catastrophe. If you ignore a hairline fracture in a support beam, the bridge falls. This was a fracture. I parked the car in the circular drive. The fountain in the center was turned off, the basin filled with dead leaves. I walked to the front door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled different. It used to smell of Ives's old leather books and the lemon polish the cleaners used. Now it smelled of something sharp and floral, expensive perfume, and the stale, yeasty scent of champagne. I found Chloe in the sunroom at the back of the house. It was a beautiful room, encased in glass, usually flooded with morning light. Today the gray light filtered in, casting long, pale shadows across the floor. She was lounging on a chaise, wearing a white cashmere robe that looked brand new. It was plush, pristine, wrapped around her like a layer of insulation against the reality of the last 48 hours. She was holding a crystal flute. I expected orange juice. I smelled the alcohol from the doorway, a mimosa, but it was the table that stopped me cold. The glass coffee table was buried under a blizzard of paper. James's papers. I recognized the leather-bound ledgers of the business. I saw bank statements with the sterling logo. I saw deed copies, life insurance policies, and stack of legal documents. She didn't stand up when I entered. She didn't offer a cheek to be kissed. She tapped a calculator with a manicured nail, her eyes darting between a ledger and the screen. Coffee, she offered, not looking up. There's some in the kitchen. No, I said, my voice flat. Actually, good, she said, finally looking up. Her face was fresh, rested. The maid is busy packing James's clothes for donation. I don't want to disturb her. I froze. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Donation? I asked. The word felt foreign in my mouth. The blood rose in my neck, hot and fast, a hydraulic pressure building behind my eyes. Chloe, it has been 48 hours. The funeral was yesterday. I stepped closer, my shoes clicking loudly on the marble. You can't just erase him. His scent is still on those shirts. She flipped a page in the ledger, the paper making a crisp snick sound. I'm decluttering, William. It's part of the healing process. Feng shui, out with the old energy. She took a sip of her drink, looking at me over the rim of the glass. The mask of the grieving widow, the one she had worn so poorly at the cemetery, was completely gone. In its place was a look of predatory triumph. It was the look of a scavenging bird that had finally waited out the lion. Let's cut to the chase, she said, setting the glass down on a coaster. I've been reviewing the finances. James was conservative, painfully so. I narrowed my eyes, studying her posture. She was relaxed, too relaxed. He was careful, I said, defending my son's ghost. He was smart. He understood risk management. He was boring, she corrected, snapping the word like a dry twig. He sat on assets like a dragon on gold, but he never spent it. He never lived. She tapped a thick stack of papers with her index finger. But he did leave a significant life insurance policy, and she paused, a small smile playing on her lips. The liquid inheritance you transferred to him last month for the business expansion. I stepped up to the edge of the table, looking down at her. $5 million, I said. Correct? Correct, she smiled. Give or take a few cents. That money was for the logistics company, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hands were curling into fists at my sides. It was a capital injection to upgrade the fleet and save 300 jobs during the economic downturn. It is not personal inheritance. It is encumbered business capital. She laughed. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. She said. I paused, my internal structural analysis flashing red warnings. Excuse me. James deposited it into the joint holding account before he died, she explained, her voice taking on the lecture-like tone of someone explaining simple math to a child. He wanted it accessible for the transfer, but he died before he moved it to the corporate account. She leaned back in her chair, stretching her legs, looking utterly satisfied. Which means, William, as the surviving spouse, it's mine. I've already initiated the transfer to my personal accounts. I stood the room suddenly felt very cold, as if the glass walls had shattered and let the Atlantic wind inside. You moved the business capital? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe, payroll is due next week. If that money is gone, the company defaults on its credit line. I leaned my hands on the glass table, leaning into her space. 300 families will lose their livelihood. Drivers, mechanics, secretaries, people who have worked for us for 20 years. You are pulling the supports out from under a skyscraper. She shrugged. She actually shrugged, a casual lift of one shoulder. Not my problem, she said. I'm selling the company anyway, she continued, examining her fingernails. I have a buyer in Hong Kong who wants the assets. They don't care about the brand or the employees. They want the roots and the licenses. I'll strip it, sell the fleet, and cash out. You can't do that, I said. My voice dropped to a low growl, a rumble from the basement of my chest. I built that company. I poured my life into it. James ran it with honor. You are talking about destroying a legacy for a quick payday. I'm talking about my future, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. She slammed her glass down. Ideally, it would have shattered, punctuating her anger, but it just spilled sticky orange liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. I gave 5 years of my youth to your boring son, she shouted, standing up. Her face twisted, the pretty features warping into something ugly and resentful. I listened to his endless stories about bridges, about tensile strength and load distribution. I went to your stuffy charity galas and smiled at old men in tuxedos who smelled like mothballs. I played the part of the good wife. She walked around the table, her robe billowing. I earned this, she screamed. I put in the time. You earned nothing, I said coldly. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. You spent his money. You alienated his friends, and you stressed him into an early grave. I pointed a finger at her, holding it steady like a gun. I will not let you steal the company funds. I will tie you up in court for the next 10 years. I will drain that inheritance on legal fees until you are destitute. She laughed again. It was a harsh, ugly sound that grated against the bright morning light. You won't let me? She mocked. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and malice. Liam, look at you. You're old. You're retired. You're a relic. She walked around me, circling like a shark. You have no power here. The law is on my side. I am the wife. You are just the father-in-law. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and I have the pass. She stopped in front of me, inches away. I'm going to sell this house, too, she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. I'm moving to Paris. I'm going to live the life I deserve. A life with color. With noise. And you? She sneered, looking me up and down with utter contempt. Also, you can go rout in that mausoleum you call a home. You can go polish your medals and your architectural awards. I stared at her. I didn't blink. I switched off the part of me that was a father, a friend, a human being. I engaged the part of me that solved problems, the part of me that looked at a collapsing structure and decided where to place the explosives to bring it down safely. I am giving you one chance, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Return the $5 million to the business account. Leave the company intact. If you do that, you can keep the villa. We can walk away. Or what? She asked, her eyes widening in mock terror. You'll scold me? You'll write me a stern letter? Or I will treat you like a hostile entity. I said, I will treat you like a structural flaw. She smiled, a cruel twisting of red lips. You really are pathetic. You think you can threaten me? She leaned in closer, her breath warm on my face. I have the best lawyers in the city. I have the money. I have the power. Then she said the words that sealed her fate, the words that turned the key in the ignition of the machine I was about to build. I wish you a happy begging life, you old fool. I wish you a happy begging life. The words hung in the air, vibrating. It wasn't just greed. It was hatred, pure distilled hatred for everything I was, everything James was. She hated us because we were builders, and she was a consumer. She hated me because I saw through her. I didn't shout. I didn't raise a hand. I simply looked at her. I memorized the arrogance in her eyes. I memorized the way she held her chin high, thinking she was the queen of the chessboard. I memorized the way the light hit the champagne glass. As you wish, I said. I turned and walked out. I walked past the packing boxes filled with my son's life. His favorite sweaters, his books, his history, already taped shut and marked for disposal. I walked out the front door, past the fountain that no longer flowed. I walked past the new Mercedes G-Wagon, gleaming like a hearse in the driveway. I got into my car and drove through the gates. She watched me go from the window. I could feel her gaze. She thought I was retreating. She thought she had broken the old man. She thought she had won the war, because she had fired the first shot. She forgot one thing. Before I was an old man, before I was a grieving father, I was a shark in a suit. I was a man who moved mountains of steel and reshaped skylines. I didn't go home to weep. I shifted the Jaguar into gear, and for the first time in days, the fog in my mind cleared. The grief was still there, a heavy load, but now it had a purpose. It was fuel. I drove straight to the city, to the financial district, to the place where I kept my blueprints. The building was coming down, all right, but I was going to be the one to push the plunger. I didn't go home. Home was a place of silence and memories I wasn't ready to confront. Instead, I drove straight into the heart of the city. The skyline of the financial district rose up to meet me, jagged teeth of steel and glass biting into the gray underbelly of the clouds. I looked at the buildings as I drove, the needle-thin spire of the Commerce Tower, the brutalist block of the Federal Reserve. I knew them intimately. I knew which coruscations went down to bedrock and which relied on friction piles. I knew where the wind tunnels formed and where the stress fractures would inevitably appear in 50 years. I felt a strange kinship with the concrete. It was hard, unyielding. It didn't weep. I pulled up to a nondescript brick building on 4th Street. It was an older structure, 3 stories of red brick, that had survived the gentrification of the neighborhood. It was the office of Sterling and Associates, my private consultancy firm. I hadn't set foot in it for 2 years. Not since the day I officially handed the keys of the main infrastructure business to James. But I still paid the rent. I still paid the utility bills. A builder always keeps a workshop. Even if he stops building, I unlocked the heavy oak door. The air inside was stale, a time capsule of breathless oxygen smelling of dust, old toner, and lemon oil. I flipped the light switch. A bank of fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered, buzzed like an angry hornet, and then settled into a clinical, white hum. I walked to my desk. A layer of gray dust coated the mahogany surface, undisturbed. I ran a finger through it, leaving a streak of dark wood visible. I sat down in my leather chair. It groaned under my weight. A familiar sound that triggered a muscle memory of late nights and hard negotiations. I picked up the landline phone. It was an old model, heavy plastic, connected by a cord. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Marcus," I said when he answered. "William?" Marcus's voice was thick with sleep or worry. "Where are you? Are you okay? You left the villa hours ago." "Can't evade the protocol," I said. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that carried 40 years of history. The protocol wasn't a spy code. It was our shorthand for a hostile takeover defense. It meant we were going to war, William, Marcus said slowly, his lawyerly caution kicking in. "What happened?" "She stole the expansion capital," I said, my voice devoid of tremor. "She's liquidating the company. She's selling the fleet. She's selling the villa." I took a deep breath, staring at a framed photo of James on my desk. He was laughing, wearing a hard hat that was too big for him. He was 10 years old, and she told me to beg. The silence on the other end lengthened. Marcus knew me better than anyone. He knew that I didn't get angry in a way that involved shouting or throwing things. I got quiet. I got precise. "I'm coming over," Marcus said, the weariness gone from his voice. "I'll bring Sarah, my niece." She wasn't a lawyer. She was a forensic accountant who worked for the district attorney's office before going private. She could find a missing penny in a national budget. She saw numbers the way I saw steel beams, as lines of force that could be traced back to their source. "Hurry," I said. By noon, my dusty office had been transformed. It was no longer a museum. It was a command center. We had dragged 3 whiteboards out of the storage closet. We had laptops humming on the conference table, their fans whirring in the quiet room. The smell of stale dust was replaced by the aroma of strong, bitter coffee brewing in the corner. Sarah was typing furiously on her laptop, her fingers moving in a blur. She was 30, sharp-featured, with glasses that reflected the scrolling cascades of data on her screen. She didn't offer condolences. She knew that the best way to honor James right now was to dissect his wife's finances. "Okay, let's look at the damage," Sarah said, hitting a final key. She projected a spreadsheet onto the wall monitor. It was a chaotic web of transactions, but Sarah had color-coded them into a narrative. She wasn't lying, Sarah said, her voice clinical. She moved the $5 million this morning, 8:15 a.m. My heart sank, a heavy stone dropping into deep water. It's gone? Not yet, Sarah said, holding up a hand. It's sitting in a holding account at Chase Bank. She initiated a wire transfer to an offshore account in the Caymans. Obsidian Holdings Limited. She pointed to the red line on the screen. But for an amount that size, especially from a domestic business account to an offshore shell, the bank's fraud algorithm triggers a mandatory review. It requires a 24-hour clearance period. She's waiting for the wire clearance, Marcus added. He was pacing the length of the room, his tie loosened, reviewing property laws on his tablet. That gives us until 8:15 a.m. tomorrow. She's also listed the villa with a private broker, Marcus continued, tapping his screen. Pocket listing, cash buyers only, fast close. She's asking 20% below market value, and she's put the logistics fleet up for auction, I said, looking at the printouts on the table. Trucks, warehouses, dispatch systems. She's stripping the copper out of the walls. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. The behavior didn't match the persona. She's moving fast. Panic fast, I murmured. Why? Marcus asked, stopping his pacing. She thinks she has the money. She thinks she has the house. Why the fire sale? Why sell a $10 million estate for $8 million just to close a week early? I rubbed my chin, the stubble rasping against my skin. I closed my eyes and visualized the structure of the situation. Chloe was arrogant. Yes. But arrogance is usually lazy. Arrogance takes its time because it believes it is untouchable. This was not arrogance. This was acceleration. Greed is patient, I said softly, opening my eyes. Greed waits for the stock to peak. Desperation is fast. I looked at Sarah. Dig, I said. Find out why she's running. Find the load that's pushing her. There is a stress fracture we aren't seeing. Sarah nodded, her face tightened with focus. I'm going into her personal credit history. If she has a digital footprint, I'll find it. 10 minutes passed. The room was silent, save for the clicking of keys and the hum of the server. Outside, the rain intensified, lashing against the windows like gravel. Then a timid knock on the door broke the trance. I looked at Marcus. He shrugged. We weren't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and opened it a crack. A woman stood there, soaking wet, clutching a cardboard box, wrapped in a plastic garbage bag to keep it dry. It was Elena, the housekeeper, from the villa. A woman who had worked for James for 4 years. She was trembling. Mr. Sterling? She whispered, her eyes wide and frightened. I saw your car at the office building. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Elena, I said, opening the door wide. Come in. You're freezing. She stepped inside, dripping water onto the hardwood. She looked around the war room, at the screens and the whiteboards, and seemed to shrink. What is this? I asked, gesturing to the box. She fired us all, Elena said, her voice hitching. This morning, right after you left. She told us to get out. She said she was bringing in her own people. Elena set the box on a chair. I was emptying the recycling bin in the study. Elena said, I found these. She had buried them at the bottom of the trash. But they looked important. They were marked urgent. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. She was hiding these from James. I think she was in trouble. I didn't know who else to bring them to. I reached into the box. It was filled with crumpled envelopes. I picked one up. It was heavy, high-quality paper, but there was no corporate logo, just a return address. A P.O. box in Jersey City. Thank you, Elena, I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing. Sarah stood up and walked over. She took the letter from my hand. She didn't hesitate. She ripped it open. She scanned the document. Her eyes widened behind her glasses. I found it, Sarah said quietly. The tone of her voice stopped Marcus in his tracks. We turned to her. She's not moving to Paris, Sarah said. She walked back to her computer and typed in a name from the letter. She pulled up a new document on the wall screen. It was a dossier. She's moving to avoid prosecution. Or worse. Look at this. Sarah pointed to a series of bank transactions she had just uncovered, cross-referencing them with the dates on the letters. She was managing the payroll accounts for James while he was sick, right? Sarah asked. Yes, I said, a sick feeling rising in my throat. James was too weak to sign the checks. He trusted her with the books. She was skimming, Sarah said. It started 6 months ago. Small amounts. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Consulting fees, vendor payments, to companies that don't exist. Then it got bigger, Sarah continued, her finger tracing the exponential curve on the graph. In the last month, while James was in the hospital, she siphoned off nearly $400,000. Where did it go? Marcus asked, horrified. An online gambling crypto wallet, Sarah said. She showed us a graph. It was a straight red line, plummeting down. She didn't buy shoes, William. She was gambling. High-stakes online poker and crypto futures. She has a problem, a massive addiction. And she lost it? I asked.
Every cent, Sarah said. She chased her losses. A classic gambler's ruin. I stared at the screen. The numbers blurred. My son lay dying in a hospital bed, his heart failing from the stress of keeping his company afloat, and his wife was in the next room, betting his legacy on digital coins.
She's in debt, I realized. Deep debt, Sarah said, tapping the letter from Elena, to the people who sent these letters. Vance Holdings. Sarah looked at me. Julian Vance. The name landed in the room like a grenade. I know that name, Marcus said, his face paling. He's not a banker. He runs a syndicate out of Jersey. These aren't loans, William? This is vigorous. These are loan sharks. That's why she needs the $5 million, I said, the realization washing over me like cold water. Not for a villa in France, I whispered, but to pay off a syndicate before they break her legs. She owes them $2 million, Sarah read from the demand letter. Due tomorrow, or else. The betrayal was deeper than I thought. It wasn't just greed. It was survival. She was a rat in a trap, and she had been willing to feed my son to the mechanism to save herself. That's the leverage, I said, but it's not enough to stop her today, Marcus warned, always the lawyer. She can claim the skimming was espousal. She can claim the gambling was a hobby. It gets messy in civil court. It takes months to freeze assets based on this. We don't have months, I said. We have 19 hours before that wire clears. We need a hammer, I said. I turned away from the screen and looked at the whiteboard where we had listed the assets. The villa, the car, the company. I stared at the word villa. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. I wasn't in the dusty office anymore. I was 5 years in the past, sitting in this very room, the smell of fresh ink in the air. I was 5 years in the past, sitting in this very room, the smell of fresh ink in the air. I was signing the papers for the villa purchase. Marcus was sitting across from me. I remembered the specific clause I had insisted on. At the time, James had been annoyed. He thought I was being controlling. I had told him it was standard asset protection. I have an idea, I said. A cold smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of an engineer who realizes the bridge he is inspecting has a fatal flaw that only he knows about. A structural weakness she forgot about. What is it? Marcus asked. The villa, I said. James never owned it. Marcus looked confused. I thought you gifted it to them. The deed is in their name. I gifted them the use of it, I corrected. But the deed is held by the Sterling Generational Trust. I stood up and walked to the filing cabinet in the corner. I took a key from my keychain, a key I hadn't used in years, and opened the top drawer. I pulled out a thick, dusty file. I blew the dust off the cover. The trust documents state that the property is for the residence of James Sterling and his lawful issue, I read. Lawful issue? Sarah asked. Children, Marcus clarified, his eyes lighting up as he remembered. Exactly, I said. It grants a life estate to James, but upon his death, if there are no children, the property reverts to the trust. It does not grant ownership to a surviving spouse without issue. She's living in a house she doesn't own, Marcus breathed. She's trying to sell a house she doesn't have title to. And the company capital? Sarah asked. The 5 million? That money was a loan, I said, improvising the next beam of my structure. Or at least, we can make it look like one. A secured loan against James's equity in the villa, I said, which, as we just established, doesn't exist. I turned to them. The plan was forming. It was ruthless. It was dangerous. But it was the only way to stop the wire transfer. If the money isn't used for the business, the loan is in default, I said. And if the loan is in default, Marcus started, his eyes widening. The lender can seize the collateral, I finished. You're the lender, Sarah said, smiling for the first time. Exactly, I said. She thinks she owns the board, I said, slamming the file shut. She thinks she's playing chess. She doesn't realize she's playing on a table I built, and I'm about to pull the legs out from under it. It's risky, William, Marcus warned. If we move on this, we declare total war. If she fights this, she could expose the trust details. It could drag on. She won't fight, I said. She can't fight. She has 24 hours before Julian Vance comes for his money. I thought of the dirt hitting the casket. Thwack. I thought of the tapping foot. Tap, tap. I thought of the begging life comment. She wished me a begging life, I said softly. I intend to show her what that actually looks like. We needed her to commit one final, undeniable act. Skimming the payroll was bad, but it was messy. We needed something clean. We needed her to lie on an official record regarding the classification of the $5 million. We needed her to claim it was a gift when we had the paperwork, albeit manufactured through the trust's leverage to prove it was a loan. I sat in the leather chair, the dust of the office settling on the shoulders of my wool coat. I stared at the phone. It was a black plastic instrument, heavy and archaic. It felt like a detonator. She's expecting a fight, Marcus said, leaning against the whiteboard, his arms crossed. If you come at her hard, she'll turtle, she'll lawyer up, and the money will stay frozen for months. We need her to think the door is open. I know, I said. I have to play the part she wrote for me. The defeated old man, Sarah whispered. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone hummed in my ear. A flat, monotonous F-sharp. I dialed her number. Ring, ring, ring. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the performance. Whit, she answered on the fourth ring. No greeting, no pleasantries, just a sharp, defensive bark. Background noise, the rustle of silk, the click of heels on hardwood. She was pacing. Chloe? I said. I let my shoulders slump, compressing my diaphragm to make my voice sound thinner, older. I injected a tremor into the syllables. It's William. I know who it is, she snapped. I don't have time for lectures, William. My lawyers are drafting the sale agreement for the logistics fleet. Do you have a counter-offer, or are you just calling to harass a grieving widow? I'm not calling to fight, I said, letting a long, weary sigh escape into the receiver. You win. There was a pause. The background noise stopped. Excuse me? Her voice dropped an octave, suspicion warring with triumph. I'm tired, Chloe, I lied. I'm 72 years old. I just buried my son. I walked into this office today, intending to fight you, but I don't have the energy. I knew you'd come around, she chirped. The suspicion evaporated instantly, replaced by a smug, toxic sweetness. It's better this way, William. James wouldn't have wanted us to fight. The mention of his name made my grip on the phone tighten so hard the plastic creaked. I forced myself to unclench. Did you call to apologize? She asked. Fishing for total submission. I called to tell you that I found a document, I said. In James's private safe here at the office. What document? Her voice sharpened again. It's a promissory note regarding the $5 million. I lied. It says it's a loan, repayable upon demand. Silence. A tense, vibrating silence stretched across the line. I could hear her breathing, short, shallow breath. Soon knew it was a lie, or she feared it was the truth she had conveniently forgotten. That's a forgery, she stammered. James gave me that money. It doesn't matter, I interrupted. I'm willing to overlook it. You are? I'm willing to sign a waiver, I said. A document stating that the promissory note is void and that the transfer was indeed a gift. To clear the title for you, so the bank will release the funds immediately. Why would you do that? She asked. Yesterday you threatened to ruin me because if I fight you, the lawyers take it all, I said, channeling every ounce of world weariness I possessed. And I just want to go back to my farm. I want to grieve in peace. I want this over. Meet me at the bank, I said. Chase Bank on 5th. In 1 hour. I'll bring the waiver. We sign, you get your money, and we never speak again. I could hear the gears turning in her head. She was calculating. It was too easy, but the debt was pressing on her. Julian Vance was breathing down her neck. She needed that money today. Desperation makes people blind to traps. Fine, she said, her voice regaining its arrogance. 1 hour. Don't waste my time, William. If you try anything, I'll sue you for harassment. I'll be there, I said. I hung up. I looked at Marcus and Sarah. She's coming, I said, my voice returning to its normal, steel-reinforced timbre. Call your contact at the district attorney's office, I told Marcus. Tell him we have a grand larceny in progress. Tell him we have the paper trail for the wire fraud. Marcus nodded. Already dialing. What about the FBI? Agent Miller owes me a favor from the construction union racketeering case 10 years ago. I said, call him. Tell him we're serving up a RICO predicate on a silver platter. I grabbed my heavy wool coat from the rack. I checked my watch. I had 45 minutes to get to the bank, but just as I reached for the door handle, it turned from the outside. The door swung open, bringing a gust of wet, cold air into the warm office. A man blocked our path. He wasn't a client. He wasn't a courier. He was 6'4", wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He had a scar running down his left cheek, bisecting his beard, a jagged line of white tissue against tan skin. He stood in the doorway, filling the frame behind him. On the street, a black sedan idled. Mr. Sterling, the stranger said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly terrifying. It was the enforcer, one of Julian Vance's men. Sarah froze near the computers. Marcus took a half step in front of her. We hear Chloe is cashing out, the man said. He didn't step inside. He didn't need to. His presence was intrusion enough. We hear there is $5 million moving through the pipes today. I didn't back down. I had dealt with union toughs and corrupt zoning inspectors in the 80s. I knew that fear was a scent, and they could smell it. Who are you? I asked, though I knew I'm a concerned creditor. The man smiled, the scar distorting the expression. Mrs. Sterling owes Mr. Vance a significant sum. We intend to collect. We were worried you might be interfering with her liquidity. He looked at the whiteboards. He looked at the laptops. He saw the war room. It looks like you are interfering, he said, his voice dropping. I stood tall. I buttoned my coat. She is meeting me at the bank, I said calmly. She is attempting to access the funds. Good, the man said. Then we will go to the bank. If you want your money, I said, locking eyes with him, you'll have to wait in line. In line behind who? He sneered. You? Behind the FBI, I said. The man's eyes narrowed. The smooth veneer cracked for a millisecond. The FBI? They are meeting us there, I lied, or rather predicted. They are monitoring the wire transfer. They have the account flagged for laundering. I took a step toward him. If I were you, I said, I would disappear. If you show up at that bank, you become an accessory to federal wire fraud. Vance won't like that. The man looked at me. He looked at Marcus, who was holding his phone up, clearly connected to a call. He calculated the odds. He nodded once. A microscopic movement. Tell her, the man said softly, that the interest rate just doubled. He turned and vanished into the rain. The black sedan pulled away before the door even clicked shut. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking slightly. Now, I said to Marcus, we really have to hurry. I got into my Jaguar. The leather seats were cold. The engine sputtered, then caught. I drove fast, too fast for the weather. The rain was coming down in sheets now, blurring the world into streaks of gray and neon. The windshield wipers slapped a frantic rhythm against the glass. Thwump hiss. Thwump hiss. I had 40 minutes. I merged onto the expressway. The city was a grid of lights ahead of me. Somewhere in that grid, Chloe was sitting in a plush chair, dreaming of Paris, unaware that the walls were closing in. Then disaster struck. Boom. It sounded like a gunshot. My car swerved violently to the right. The steering wheel jerked in my hands, fighting me like a living thing. The rear of the car fishtailed on the wet asphalt. "Steady," I whispered, gripping the wheel. "Steady." I pumped the brakes, correcting the skid, and guided the limping beast to the narrow shoulder of the highway. I stopped. The car listed heavily to the right. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. No, not now. I looked at my watch. 25 minutes left. I got out. The wind hit me instantly, driving the rain into my collar. A semi-truck roared past, spraying me with a wave of dirty road water. I walked to the front right. The tire was shredded. A jagged piece of metal, scrap from a construction truck, protruded from the rubber. I reached for my phone to call AAA, then I stopped. They would take an hour. I didn't have an hour. I had the rest of my life, depending on the next 20 minutes. "Damn it," I cursed, the sound swallowed by the traffic noise. I took off my expensive wool coat and tossed it into the back seat. I was in my suit sleeves. I rolled them up. I am 72. My back hurts when it rains. My hands have a tremor. But I am a builder. I popped the trunk. I wrestled the spare tire out. It was heavy, dead weight. I dragged the jack out. I knelt in the mud on the side of the highway. The water soaked through the knees of my suit trousers instantly. I positioned the jack under the chassis. I began to crank. Creak, turn, creak, turn. My breath came in ragged gasps. My heart was thumping a dangerous rhythm, the same rhythm that had killed James. Stress. Load. Failure. "Not today," I gritted out. The car rose. I grabbed the tire iron. I fitted it over the first lug nut. I pulled. It didn't move. It was rusted tight. I pulled harder, my muscles screaming. Nothing. I was an old man on the side of the road, defeated by a piece of rusted steel. Think, I told myself. Physics. Leverage. I stood up. I repositioned the iron so it was parallel to the ground. I stepped onto the tire iron. I put my full weight on it. I held onto the side of the car for balance. I bounced once, twice. Screech. The metal screamed, and the nut gave way. I did it for the second one. The third. By the time I had the flat tire off, I was gasping for air. My shirt was plastered to my skin. My hands were covered in black grease and road grit. My shoes were ruined. I lifted the spare onto the axle. I tightened the nuts. I threw the tools back into the trunk. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror. I looked terrible. My hair was wild. There was a smear of grease across my forehead. I looked like a madman, but as I wiped the rain from my eyes, I realized something. This was the first time in years I felt completely alive. I wasn't the CEO in the ivory tower. I was the man in the mud, fixing the problem with my own hands. I got back into the car. 10 minutes. I slammed the accelerator. The Jaguar roared, wounded but willing. I arrived at the bank with grease on my hands, mud on my shoes, and fire in my chest. I pulled up to the valet. The attendant lifted my car, one tire, a tiny spare, the sides splattered with mud, and then at me. "Keep it close," I said, tossing him the keys. I walked into the lobby. The air conditioning hit me, freezing the wet clothes to my skin. The silence of the bank was deafening after the roar of the highway. I saw her. Chloe was sitting in the glass-walled conference room. She looked immaculate, not a hair out of place. She was checking her watch. She looked up and saw me. Her lip curled in disgust. "You look terrible," she sneered as I opened the glass door. She was sitting in a plush chair, looking like royalty. "I look like a father doing what he has to do," I said. I wiped my hands on a handkerchief. It came away black with grease. I crumpled it and dropped it on the table. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, was there. He looked nervous. He was sweating. He knew me. He knew the accounts. He also knew what was about to happen. "Okay, let's get this over with," Chloe said, impatient. She slapped a gold pen on the mahogany table. It made a sharp click. "Where's the waiver?" she demanded. Here, I said. I reached into my wet jacket pocket and pulled out a slightly damp piece of paper. I smoothed it out on the table. The document stated, I, William Sterling, acknowledge that the $5,000 transfer was a personal gift and holds no business obligation. Sign it, she commanded. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. The ink tip trembled just above the signature line. I looked at her, really looked at her. I looked for a trace of the woman James had loved. I looked for a hint of regret. One last chance, Chloe, I said softly. What? She blinked. Walk away, I said. Right now. Stand up and walk out of this bank. Take the life insurance. Leave the business capital. Leave the villa. Go start a new life. Don't sign this. She rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure, unfiltered annoyance. Sign the damn paper, old man, she shouted, her voice cracking the hushed atmosphere of the bank. I want my money. She slammed her hand on the table. I looked at the pen. I looked at her. I put the pen down. No, I said. What? Her eyes bulged, the whites visible all around the iris. The carefully applied mascara couldn't hide the shock. I said, sign it. I said no, I repeated. My voice was quiet, barely stirring the recycled air of the conference room. You tricked me, she screamed. She stood up, so abruptly that her heavy leather chair tipped backward, crashing onto the carpet with a dull thud. The noise was shocking in the hushed sanctuary of the bank. You dragged me here. You wasted my time. She was panting, her chest heaving beneath the silk dress. Mr. Henderson, initiate the wire transfer immediately. I have the authorization. I am the executor. Mr. Henderson, a man who had managed the Sterling accounts for 20 years, looked pale. He wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip. He looked at me, then at the computer screen in front of him.
Actually, Mrs. Sterling, Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly. We can't do that. Why not? She screamed, slamming her palms onto the mahogany table. The impact made the crystal pitcher of water jump. It's my money. My husband is dead. Give me my money. Because, a deep voice boomed from the doorway behind her. The funds are currently frozen, as evidence in a federal criminal investigation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chloe spun around. 2 uniformed police officers stood there, their hands resting near their belts. They were the physical wall. But behind them was the real threat. A woman in a sharp slate-gray suit, Assistant District Attorney Reynolds, and behind her the higher authority I had promised. Agent Miller from the FBI. He was older now than when I first met him. His face lined like a road map, but his eyes were as sharp as broken glass. Chloe Sterling, Agent Miller said, stepping into the room. He didn't He spoke with the terrifying calm of a man who has the entire weight of the United States government behind him. We are executing a seizure warrant on the assets in this account under the RICO Act. RICO? Chloe laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that bounced off the glass walls. That's for mobsters. That's for gangsters. I'm a housewife. I'm a grieving widow. She pointed a shaking finger at me. This is him. He's doing this. He's crazy. We know about the gambling debt, Chloe, I said, standing up. My knees popped, and my back ached from the tire change. But I stood straight. We know about Obsidian Holdings. We know about Julian Vance. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a shutter falling. The blood left her lips, leaving them pale and trembling. We know about the money laundering you did through the company payroll to pay your bookies. I continued, relentless. Structuring deposits to avoid reporting limits. Falsifying vendor invoices. That's wire fraud, I said. Interstate wire fraud because the servers are in New Jersey. That's federal, Chloe. That's not a civil dispute. That's prison. She looked at the agents, then at the banker, then at me. Her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped bird looking for a window. You called the FBI? She whispered. On family? I called the people who protect the law, I said, because you didn't just steal money. You stole a legacy. You stole the safety of 300 families. Arrest her, Agent Miller said to the officers. No, wait. Chloe backed away, stumbling over the fallen chair. She hit the glass wall, her palms flattening against it as if she could push through. William, William, please. Her voice broke, the arrogance finally shattering under the load. It was a mistake. I have a problem. I'm sick. I need help. She lunged toward me, grabbing the lapels of my dirty suit jacket. Her hands were manicured perfect, clutching the grease-stained wool. You can't let them take me, Vance. If I go to jail, Vance's men, they'll find me. They'll kill me. I looked down at her hands. I gently but firmly removed them from my coat. I wished you a happy life, I said calmly, echoing her own words back to her. But you chose a criminal one. The officers moved in. It wasn't like the movies. It was clumsy and loud. They grabbed her wrists. Get off me, she shrieked. You're hurting me. As the metal cuffs clicked shut, a sound final and metallic, she started screaming in earnest. It was the scream of a child who was being told no for the first time in her life. The villa. I want to go to my house. I need my things. I need to call my lawyer. About that, I said, stepping closer as the officers held her. I wanted her to hear this. I wanted the demolition to be complete. My lawyer has just executed the default clause on the property trust. She stopped struggling for a second, staring at me. The villa is no longer your residence, I said, my voice cold and fatal. Because you have no children with James, and because you attempted to encumber the property with criminal debt. The trust has reclaimed the title. The locks are being changed as we speak, I said. Your clothes, your jewelry, your collection of handbags, anything purchased with the embezzled funds is being inventoried by the police. My car, she shrieked, her eyes wild. My Mercedes. It's outside. I bought it with my own money. Marcus stepped into the room. He had been standing in the hall, witnessing the execution of the legal trap. The Mercedes was purchased with funds siphoned from the Sterling Logistics payroll account, Marcus said, consulting his tablet. We traced the check. He checked his watch. It has been reported as stolen property. A tow truck is picking it up from the bank parking lot right now. She slumped. The officers had to hold her up. You ruined me, she screamed, a raw, guttural sound. Spittle flew from her mouth. You ruined my life. You evil old man. I watched them drag her out. She kicked at the doorframe. By Dior. She cursed my name. She cursed James. People in the lobby stared. The bank tellers stopped working. I stood there covered in grease and mud, feeling the weight of the moment. No, Chloe, I whispered to the empty doorway. I just balanced the ledger. The room was quiet again.
Agent Miller stayed behind. William, he said, nodding at me, you look like hell. I had a flat tire, I said. She's done. Miller said, with the evidence your niece compiled, plus the attempt to wire the funds today, we have her on 5 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of money laundering. She's looking at 15 to 20 years. Good, I said. I should have felt triumphant. I had won. I had protected the company. I had saved the jobs. I had avenged my son. But I just felt tired. I felt old. I looked at my hands. The grease was still there, stained into the skin. Do you need a ride? Marcus asked gently. No, I said. I need to go wash my hands. The arrest was just the beginning. The story didn't end with handcuffs.
It ended with the dismantling of a life built on lies. With Chloe in custody, the dominoes fell fast and hard. First came the bail hearing. It was 3 days later. Her lawyers, expensive sharks she had hired on credit, tried to get her out. They argued she wasn't a flight risk. They painted her as a grieving widow confused by loss, a victim of a misunderstanding. I took the stand. I sat in the witness box, wearing a clean suit, my hands folded. She told me she was moving to Paris. I testified, my voice ringing clear in the courtroom. I looked directly at the judge. She has a buyer for the company in Hong Kong. She has liquidated personal assets. She has no ties to this community, other than the crimes she committed against her husband's legacy. The judge looked at the evidence Sarah had compiled, the one-way ticket reservations Sarah had found in her search history, the emails to realtors in France. He set bail at $5 million. She didn't have it. Her accounts were frozen. Her friends, the socialites she had lunched with, vanished into the woodwork. She went back to the cell. Then came the calls. The gambling syndicate found out she was in jail. They realized they couldn't get to her, so they turned to the next closest source of revenue. My home phone rang late one night. "We want our money," a gravelly voice growled. It was the same man who had been at my office. "Your daughter-in-law ran up a tab. We expect the family to honor it." I held the phone tight. I was alone in my farmhouse. The wind was howling outside. "She is no longer family," I said into the receiver. "The marriage ended when she betrayed him." And I added, glancing at the caller ID box which was blinking with a recording light, "This line is tapped by the FBI as part of the RICO investigation against her. You are currently speaking to a federal witness." There was a click. They never called again. I went to the villa a week later. It was silent. The staff had left. The security gate was open, the mechanism disabled. I walked through the empty room. The expensive art she had bought, modern, jagged pieces that James hated, was gone, seized by the authorities as proceeds of crime. The house felt vast and hollow. It was a beautiful shell, but the soul had been sucked out of it. I walked out to the terrace. The rain had finally stopped. The ocean was blue, the waves crashing against the cliffs with a rhythmic, soothing sound. I sat on a teak bench. I ate about the structural integrity of a family. It's not built on blood, it's built on trust, on shared loads. When one beam fails, the others have to take the weight. But when a beam actively rots the others, you have to cut it out. I should have felt peace. But grief is a strange tenant. It doesn't pay rent, and it refuses to leave. Then my cell phone started ringing. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I knew who it was. I pressed the green button. "This is a collect call from the Westside Detention Center," a robotic voice said. "Press 1 to accept." I pressed 1 to accept. I pressed 1. "William?" Her voice was small, tinny, broken. It wasn't the voice of the woman in the G-Wagon. It was the voice of a child in the dark. "Hello, Chloe. It's cold here," she said. Her teeth were chattering. "The food, I can't eat it. The women in here, they look at me. Please," she begged, her voice cracking into a sob. "Please post the bail. I know you have it. I'll sign everything over. I'll leave the country. Just get me out. I'm scared." I looked out at the ocean. I watched a seagull diving for fish. "I can't do that, Chloe." "Why not?" The anger flared up, a ghost of her old self. "You have millions. You're drowning in money. You cruel old man. How can you sleep at night?" "I sleep fine," I said. "I'm not cruel." I paused. "I'm just a builder, and you are the rubble." I hung up. She called again the next day, and the day after that. The phone became a haunting presence in my farmhouse. I had moved out of the city, away from the noise, but the digital ghost of Chloe followed me. Ring, ring, ring. I sat in my armchair, watching the fire crackle, letting the answering machine screen the calls. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her voice on the second day was hysterical, jagged with panic. "I loved James. I really did. You have to believe me, William." The gambling? It was just a way to cope. I was trying to win it back for us. "You loved his wallet," I said to the empty room, taking a sip of scotch. "Don't lie to me." Day 3 brought a new tactic. Manipulation. "My mother is sick. She needs me." Chloe sobbed into the receiver. "She's in a home in Delaware. If I go to prison, who will pay for her care?" "She'll die, William. Do you want that on your conscience?" I frowned. I set down my glass. I pulled out my laptop. I am a man of facts. I accessed the public death records. "I checked," I whispered to the machine. "Your mother died of emphysema 10 years ago. You didn't even go to the funeral. She screamed obscenities when the timer cut her off. The mask had slipped completely. There was no grieving widow left, only a cornered animal baring its teeth. Day 4 stopped my heart. "I'm pregnant." The 2 words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stared at the phone. My hand hovered over the receiver a second. Just one irrational, hopeful second. My structural integrity failed. A grandchild. A piece of James left in the world? Was it possible? I imagined a child. A boy with James's eyes. A girl with his laugh. But then the engineer in me took over. I looked at the timeline. James had been in the cardiac ICU for 6 weeks before he died. He had been on a ventilator for the last 2. It was biologically impossible. Just to be certain, because I deal in loads. Not guesses. I called the prison warden. I had leverage now. I was the star witness. I asked for medical confirmation. Negative, Mr. Sterling, the warden said 10 minutes later. The prisoner is not pregnant. She attempted to bribe a nurse, to falsify a test. But she has been placed in isolation. It was a lie, the cruelest lie she could manufacture. She had tried to weaponize my dead son's memory to secure her bail. That was the moment the last ember of pity died in my chest. It was doused by the cold water of her narcissism. The calls continued. They became a ritual of my evenings. Ring, ring, ring. I stopped answering. I stopped listening to the messages. I just watched the counter on the digital display of my landline. 10 calls, 50 calls, 100 calls. She was spiraling, in the silence of her cell, stripped of her mimosas and her designer silk. She was realizing the absolute truth of her situation. She was realizing that the old fool she had mocked was the only person on earth who had the power to save her. And she was realizing that she had burned that bridge to ash, then dynamited the foundations. By the time the trial started, 3 months later, the counter stood at 210 calls. $2,000. $2,000 sums. 2,000 cries into the void. The trial was a spectacle. The local news ate it up. They dubbed her the widow of Wall Street, though James's business had been logistics. Not stocks. The headline was too good to check. I sat in the front row, every day. I wore my best suit. I sat with a straight back. Chloe looked terrible. The transformation was absolute. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Her hair, once a chemically perfected curtain of gold, was limp and dark at the roots. She had lost weight. She looked 20 years older. She refused to look at me. She stared at the table, her hands shackled to her waist. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah's forensic accounting was a masterpiece of clarity. It showed the siphoning, the gambling sites, the falsified invoices. It painted a picture not of a grieving wife, but of a parasite that had been feeding on the host even as he lay dying. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just slumped. The tension left her body, leaving a pile of rags in a chair. The judge adjusted his glasses. He looked at the prosecution, then at me. Does the victim's family wish to make an impact statement? I stood up. My knees creaked, audible in the silent courtroom. I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at her. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were red, hollowed out. There was no defiance left, only fear. I don't want to talk about money, I said to the court, my voice steady. Money is its concrete and steel. It can be replaced. I want to talk about trust. I told them about James. I told them about how he worked 18-hour days to keep his drivers employed. I told them how he loved her, how he had trusted her with the combination to the safe of his life. She called me a fool, I said, looking directly at the judge. And perhaps I was a fool, for believing that family loyalty meant more than a bank balance. I was a fool for thinking that marriage was a load-bearing wall, not a facade. I paused. The courtroom was silent. Stress, I said. That is what killed my son. The stress of carrying a load that was being secretly undermined from the inside. She didn't pull the trigger, Your Honor, but she removed the supports. I took a deep breath. I request the maximum sentence, not for revenge, but for safety. Society cannot function when the architects of our lives are actually demolition experts in disguise. Chloe looked up at me. Her lips moved. William, please. The judge nodded. He hammered the gavel. 15 years in a federal penitentiary. No possibility of parole for 12. She collapsed. Her legs gave out. She was dragged away by 2 bailiffs, wailing a high, thin sound that echoed in the hallway long after the doors swung shut. But that wasn't the end. 2 years later, I was sitting in a park on the outskirts of the city. It was auditors, The leaves were turning the color of rust and fire. The air was crisp, biting at my nose. I was pushing a swing. Higher, Grandpa. Higher. A little girl was laughing. Her hair flew out behind her. Like a banner. Her name was Maya. She wasn't Chloe's child. She wasn't James's blood. The Sterling bloodline had ended in that grave 2 years ago. After the trial, I found myself in a large farmhouse with too much silence and too much money. I had realized that I had too much love left to give, and nowhere to put it. Structural energy cannot be destroyed. It has to be transferred. I had started a foundation in James's name, the Sterling Initiative for Youth. We built housing for orphans and foster children aging out of the system. And I had met Maya. She was 7. She had lost her parents in an apartment fire. She was angry, confused, and brilliant. She liked to build towers out of blocks and knock them down. She needed a foundation. I needed a structure to support. I was 74 now. My joints hurt more than ever. The damp days made my hip ache, but my heart felt light. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked it. It was an email from the prison communication system. A digital scan of a handwritten letter. Subject inmate, 8940. Set. Message. I sat down on the bench. Maya jumped off the swing and ran to the slide. I opened the image. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. Dear William, I know you won't answer my calls. I stopped counting at 21. I had been here for 730 days. Every day is the same. Gray walls, gray food, gray people. I just wanted to say, you were right about everything. I was the fool. I thought I was playing a game. I didn't realize it was real life until the door locked. I have nothing. I am nothing. The friends I bought are gone. The money is gone. James is gone. I hope you are happy. I hope you enjoy your victory. Chloe. I stared at the screen. I folded the mental image of the letter. I looked at Maya. She was at the top of the slide, shouting to a squirrel. Her laughter filled the air that used to be filled with my grief. I reached into my pocket. I took out a pen and a paper napkin from the coffee shop I had visited earlier. I wrote a reply. Chloe, I am not happy that you are in a cage. I am not a monster. I am happy that my son's legacy is safe. I am happy that 300 families kept their jobs because I stopped you. I am happy that I can sleep at night without wondering if the roof is going to cave in. I wish you redemption, but redemption is expensive. It costs the truth, and that is a price you were never willing to pay. Goodbye. I looked at the words. They were true. They were final. I stood up. I walked past a metal trash can on the way to the parking lot. I crumpled the napkin. I dropped it in. I didn't mail it. She didn't deserve the closure. She didn't deserve to occupy one more second of my time. Silence was the only answer she had earned. I walked Maya to the car. It wasn't the G-Wagon. It wasn't the flashy Jaguar anymore. It was a Volvo SUV, boxy, safe, sturdy, built to protect what was inside. Grandpa, Maya asked as I buckled her into the booster seat. Who was that letter from? You looked sad. I looked at her innocent face. Someone I used to know, I said. I got into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life, quiet, reliable. Someone who forgot that the most expensive things in life aren't things, I added. Someone who tried to build a house on sand. I put the car in gear. But we build on rock, don't we, Maya? Yes, she chirped. Concrete and steel, I smiled. A genuine smile that reached my eyes. I drove us home. The villa was sold long ago. I couldn't live there with the ghosts. A developer had bought it. I heard they turned it into a boutique hotel. I didn't care. I drove toward the farmhouse. It was smaller. The floors creaked. But it was warm. I had ruined her life. Yes, I had stripped her of every dollar, every dress, every car. I had left her with nothing but time to think about the begging life she had mocked. But as I watched the sunset painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, and listened to Maya humming a song in the back seat, I realized something profound. I hadn't just ruined a life. I had saved one. My own. The architect had cleared the rubble. The site was clean. The foundation was poured. And now, finally, in the twilight of my years, I could build something that would last. You have been the silent witnesses to this demolition and reconstruction. You watched the rubble fall, and you stayed until the new foundation was set. If you believe in the kind of justice that is built slowly, brick by brick, and if this story of resilience resonated with the architect in your own soul, then leave your mark here. Click like to cement this testimony and subscribe to join us for the next blueprint. Let's build a community that knows the difference between a gilded facade and a load-bearing wall. The site is prepared. I'll see you at the next groundbreaking.